My uncle broke my nose, my father watched. My family disowned me. Now, 7 years later, they want me back. It took exactly 24 seconds for my entire life to be destroyed by a 12-year-old girl's lie. No evidence, no questions. Just blind belief in her words and my world shattered. 7 years later, I'm still paying for something I never did. My name is Ethan Carter, and 24 hours ago, I had it all. At 20 years old, I was the guy everyone wanted to be. Smart, athletic, from a powerful family with a future so bright it was blinding. My GPA was near perfect, making me a golden candidate for any prestigious school I'd choose. On the baseball field, I was the star pitcher, with scouts already eyeing me for the pros. And at home? My dad, Robert Carter, built an empire in real estate development while Mom sat on the boards of 3 major corporations. The Carter name opened doors I didn't even know existed. That Thursday afternoon was like any other. I walked off the baseball field, sweat beading on my forehead after 3 hours of practice. Coach said I'd broken my own pitching record. Again. "Hey, Carter!" My teammate Jackson slapped my shoulder. "Finals are coming up. You going business or law school next year?" I laughed, feeling invincible. "Maybe I'll blow it all off and go pro instead." The guys laughed with me. What they didn't know, what I didn't know, was that this was the last time I'd laugh like that. The last normal moment before my life shattered. In the locker room, I finally checked my phone. My stomach dropped instantly. Hundreds of missed calls. Text messages flooding in so fast the screen couldn't keep up. The words hit me like physical blows. "Answer now! You're a monster! Don't ever come home! How could you do this?" I stood frozen, my heart hammering so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. What had I done? Was this someone's sick joke? Why wouldn't anyone explain? With shaking fingers, I called Mom. She always had my back, always. The phone rang only once before she picked up, but what I heard wasn't my mother's warm voice. "You have the nerve to call me?" she screamed, her voice unrecognizable, shrill, unhinged, filled with pure hatred. My ears rang. Mom had never spoken to me like this, not once in 20 years. "Mom, what's happening?" I managed to say. "Why? Why did you do it?" The raw pain in her voice cut deeper than any knife could. Click, the line went dead. I stood in the middle of the empty field, phone still pressed to my ear, trembling from head to toe. My heart pounded so hard it physically hurt. Everything I thought I knew had just crumbled, and I had no idea why. Then came the impact. Crack! A fist like a sledgehammer slammed into my face. I felt my nose break instantly, blood spraying across my practice jersey. The concrete was suddenly against my back, cold and unforgiving, as my head spun with shock and pain. Through the blood streaming into my eyes, I saw my Uncle Richard standing over me, his face contorted with rage. "I'll kill you!" he roared, raising his fist again. And behind him, watching silently, stood my father. Not moving to help me, just watching. My world went black as I thought. Why? What did I do? I felt another blow coming, but my father grabbed Richard's arm. "Enough!" he shouted. "Ethan, get in the car, now!" I stumbled to my feet, blood streaming down my face. My nose throbbed with sharp shooting pain. Dad didn't offer to help me up. He just turned and walked toward his black Mercedes, expecting me to follow. "What's happening?" I asked again, my voice thick with blood. No one answered. The 15-minute drive home was the longest of my life. Complete silence filled the car as I pressed my practice jersey against my bleeding nose. Dad's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I'd never seen him like this. Jaw clenched, eyes fixed forward, as if I wasn't even there. When we pulled into our driveway, I saw several cars parked outside, my aunt and uncle's SUV, my grandparents' sedan. Something was terribly wrong. The front door swung open before we even reached it. Mom stood there, her normally perfect appearance completely undone. Her mascara had run down her cheeks and her eyes, God, her eyes were red with a fury I'd never seen. "How dare you show your face here?" she screamed as I crossed the threshold. Uncle Richard pushed past me. "We need to call the police, Susan, right now." "No," Dad said sharply. "We handle this ourselves first." I stood in our marble entryway, blood dripping onto the pristine floor, surrounded by my entire family. Grandma was sobbing in the corner. Grandpa wouldn't look at me. Aunt Helen's face was twisted with disgust. "What did I do?" I pleaded, my voice breaking. "Please, someone tell me what's going on." That's when the crowd parted, and my 12-year-old cousin Amy stepped forward. Her small face was streaked with tears, her body trembling slightly. She looked terrified. He... She couldn't finish her sentence. Aunt Helen put her arm around Amy's shoulders. "It's okay, sweetie. Tell them what you told me." Amy looked up, her eyes meeting mine for just a second before darting away. "He attacked me on July 4th, when everyone was at the barbecue and we were alone in the house." The words hit me like a physical blow. My legs nearly gave out. "What? No! That's a lie!" I screamed, panic rising in my chest. "I never touched her. I would never." My father's fist slammed into my stomach before I could finish. I doubled over, gasping for air. "Don't you dare call her a liar!" Mom shrieked, her face inches from mine. "Get out of my house." But I didn't. I tried again. "Out!" Dad roared, grabbing me by the collar. "We've already packed your things." He dragged me through the house and threw me onto the front lawn. Seconds later, black garbage bags landed beside me. My clothes, my books, my life stuffed into trash bags. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Just like that, I was homeless. For a week, I called everyone. Mom, Dad, my sister, my cousins, my aunts and uncles. No one answered. Text messages went unread. Voicemails unanswered. The only response I got was a single text from my father. "You are no longer my son. Go to hell." I stood in the darkness outside our home. Correction, their home. Staring at my phone screen, those 7 words burning into my retinas. I had lost everything, and somehow I knew this was just the beginning of my nightmare. I pressed the doorbell one more time. No response. I knocked until my knuckles hurt. Nothing. From inside, I could see Mom moving through the kitchen. She glanced toward the door, then deliberately turned off the lights. The message was clear. I was dead to them. For the first time in my 20 years, I had nowhere to go. The realization hit me like ice water. I got into my car and just drove, with no destination in mind. Who could I call? My friends weren't answering. My coaches, my professors. Would any of them believe me over the accusations? The truth crashed down on me like a tidal wave. I was completely alone. That night, I reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go and tried to sleep in the back parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart. My first night without a home. My first night as a pariah. As I stared at the ceiling of my car, one thought kept circling in my mind. Why would Amy lie about something so horrible? What could possibly make her say those things? I had no answers, only questions and fear. So much fear. Morning came with harsh fluorescent lights shining through the windshield. I'd barely slept, my body aching from the awkward position, my face throbbing from Uncle Richard's fist. I splashed water on my face in a gas station bathroom, trying to make myself presentable. At least I still had college. At least I had my future. My first stop was the financial aid office to check if my scholarship would cover more of my expenses now that I was, what? Homeless? Disowned? I didn't even know what to call myself. The woman behind the desk gave me a puzzled look when I asked to check my account. "Mr. Carter, let me pull that up for you." Her fingers clicked across the keyboard. Her expression changed, brow furrowing. "There seems to be an issue with your account." She turned the monitor so I could see. "Student account, $0.00. That can't be right," I said, panic rising in my chest. "My parents paid for the full year up front." "It shows a withdrawal was processed yesterday. All funds have been removed." She lowered her voice. "The spring semester payment is due in 2 weeks. If it's not paid by then, I'm afraid you'll be administratively withdrawn." My father had called them. Of course he had. He'd cut me off completely. I spent the next 2 weeks in a desperate scramble. Student loans required a co-signer with good credit. I had no one. Emergency student aid required documentation I couldn't provide without exposing the accusation against me, which would only make things worse. Private loans needed income verification, but who would hire a full-time student with no address? Every door slammed in my face. My perfect GPA, my athletic achievements, my carefully planned future. None of it mattered anymore. Coach Matthews called me into his office the following Monday. His usual booming voice was subdued. "Ethan, I've been informed you're no longer eligible for the team due to your financial status with the university." "Coach, please," I begged. "Baseball is all I have left." His eyes held something like pity, maybe even doubt. "My hands are tied, son," and he hesitated. "There are other concerns being raised." He knew. They all knew. The rumors had started spreading. I took a job washing dishes at a diner near campus, then another job stocking shelves overnight at a grocery store. I'd attend morning classes, work all afternoon and evening, then stock shelves from midnight to 6 a.m. Sleep came in 1 or 2 hour intervals between shifts. But even working nearly 70 hours a week, I couldn't make enough for tuition plus food and gas. I showered at the campus gym while I still had access. Meals consisted of ramen noodles or leftover food from the diner. Whatever the cooks took pity on me and slipped into a to-go container. At night, I'd park my van in different spots to avoid attention, curling up in the back with a threadbare blanket I'd found at Goodwill. Winter was the worst. December brought freezing temperatures that seeped through the metal shell of the van. I'd wake up shivering violently, unable to feel my fingers and toes. I tried using newspapers for extra insulation, running the engine sparingly to avoid carbon monoxide poisoning. There were nights I truly thought I might not wake up. Summer brought its own version of hell, sweltering heat that turned the van into an oven. I'd soak a t-shirt in a public bathroom sink and wear it wet, just to keep my core temperature down. Dehydration became a constant companion. One night, parked in an abandoned lot, I stared up through the windshield at the stars. 7 months ago, I had everything: a loving family, athletic stardom, academic excellence, a future brighter than those very stars. Now I had nothing but a failing van and a pain so deep I could barely breathe around it. 2 years passed like this, each day bleeding into the next in a haze of exhaustion and despair. I finally had to drop out when my grades slipped below the minimum requirement. Without classes to attend, I picked up more manual labor jobs: construction, landscaping, whatever would pay cash daily. The baseball scholarship scouts who once pursued me wouldn't recognize the hollow-eyed, calloused-handed shell I'd become. I lost my purpose, my drive. The future I once planned with such certainty now extended only as far as my next meal or place to sleep. The worst part was the fear. I developed a paralyzing anxiety around children. Every time I saw a kid, I'd break into a cold sweat, remembering how a single lie had decimated my existence. It didn't matter that I was innocent. No one had believed me then. No one would believe me now. Alcohol became my only friend. A few shots of whiskey could temporarily dull the constant ache in my chest. When that wasn't enough, I found pills. Whatever would help me forget, even for a little while. I knew I was spiraling, but I couldn't find a reason to stop. Then came the morning my van refused to start. The engine made a sickening grinding noise, then nothing. The mechanic's verdict was final. The transmission was shot, repair costs more than the vehicle was worth. I sat on the curb outside the garage, head in my hands. My last sanctuary, the only thing keeping me from literal street homelessness, was gone. I'd been saving for a security deposit on a room somewhere, but that money would now barely cover a week in a motel. 3 days later, I stood on the roof of an apartment building downtown. I'd snuck up the fire escape, needing to feel the wind on my face, needing to be somewhere high above the city that had witnessed my fall from grace. 22 stories up, the traffic below looked like toys, the people like ants, all of them with homes to go to, families who loved them, futures to look forward to. I took out my phone, dead for 2 days now, and pressed the power button, irrationally hoping for a miracle. Maybe someone had tried to reach me. Maybe someone, anyone, had remembered I existed. The screen remained black. No calls. No texts. No one cared if Ethan Carter lived or died. I closed my eyes and edged closer to the ledge, feeling the cool evening breeze against my skin. 2 years of fighting, and for what? The accusation would follow me forever. My family would never believe me. The life I was meant to have was gone forever. One step. That's all it would take to end this nightmare. One step away from the pain. One step into oblivion. I lifted my foot, hovering it over empty space, gravity already seeming to pull at me hungrily. In that moment, suspended between life and the abyss, I felt almost peaceful, almost free. "Stop!" The voice cut through the night air like a lightning bolt. I flinched, my foot still dangling over the edge. Turning slowly, I saw a young woman running toward me across the rooftop, her hand outstretched. "Don't do it. Please." In her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine concern. Not judgment, not disgust, just raw human concern. My brain screamed at me to turn back around, to take that final step into nothingness, but my body betrayed me. Or maybe saved me. I reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were warm against my ice-cold skin as she gently pulled me back from the ledge. I collapsed onto the rooftop gravel, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. She crouched beside me, not letting go of my hand. "I'm Rachel," she said softly. "Rachel Miller." I couldn't speak. My throat felt sealed shut with all the words I'd swallowed over the past 2 years. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" she asked. I shook my head. "Are you hungry?" Another head shake, though it was a lie. I couldn't remember my last meal. "Come on." She helped me to my feet. "You can't sleep on the streets tonight." I followed her numbly, descending the fire escape. Rachel walked beside me to a modest sedan parked 2 blocks away. I hesitated at the passenger door. "Why are you helping me?" My voice came out raspy, unfamiliar. She shrugged. "Because you need it. That's reason enough." Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a converted textile factory. The space was clean and warm, filled with paintings and books. Soft lamps cast a gentle glow that seemed to physically hurt my eyes after so many nights in darkness. I stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure what to do with myself. The softness of her home felt foreign, dangerous almost, like I might contaminate it. "The bathroom's through there if you want to clean up," Rachel said, gesturing down a short hallway. "I'll make something to eat." The hot shower was my first in weeks. I watched as dirt and grime circled the drain, wishing my memories could wash away as easily. When I emerged wearing a set of borrowed clothes she'd left outside the door, Rachel was setting 2 plates on a small dining table. Nothing fancy, just pasta with marinara sauce and garlic bread. But as I sat down across from her, I felt tears threatening to spill. How long had it been since someone had cooked for me? Since I'd eaten at a real table instead of huddled in my van or on a park bench? "I don't even know your name," Rachel said as we ate. "Ethan," I replied, then hesitated. The Carter name carried weight in this city, and not the good kind anymore. Just Ethan. She nodded, not pushing for more. "Well, just Ethan. My dad runs a property management company. They need someone in maintenance. Interested?" I stared at her, suspicious. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," she replied simply. The job wasn't glamorous, fixing leaky faucets, painting hallways, changing light fixtures in the buildings her father managed. But it came with a paycheck, and more importantly, it came with purpose. For the first time in years, I had somewhere to be each morning, something to accomplish each day. Rachel convinced me to attend an AA meeting, then another, then to see a therapist at a community clinic. Step by step, she led me back to some version of humanity. Not forcing anything, just quietly making suggestions, opening doors and letting me choose to walk through them. I slept on her couch for 3 weeks before I broached the subject of finding my own place. "Why don't you stay?" she asked, looking directly at me as we sat at her kitchen table, the morning light streaming through open windows. Something inside me snapped. All the suspicion, all the fear, all the defenses I'd built erupted at once. "Why are you being so nice to me?" I shouted, slamming my palms on the table. The coffee mugs jumped. "What do you want? What's your angle? Nobody does this. Nobody helps someone like me without wanting something." Rachel didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked at me with those calm eyes and said, "Because someone needed to save you from yourself." The simplicity of her answer broke me. 2 years of stoic survival crumbled, and I wept for the first time since that night outside my family's home. I cried for the life I'd lost, for the injustice of it all, for the unfathomable kindness of this stranger who had no reason to care whether I lived or died. Rachel moved around the table and held me while I sobbed. No platitudes, no false reassurances, just presence. just someone who refused to let me disappear. 6 months later, I had my own apartment in one of her father's buildings. A small studio, nothing fancy but mine. I'd been promoted to assistant property manager, handling tenant complaints and overseeing repairs. The job suited me, solving practical problems, working with my hands when needed, but also using my mind. I'd been sober for 5 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. My therapist, Dr. Landon, had helped me work through the trauma of my family's rejection and the false accusation. I still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched when I saw families together, but I was learning to manage the anxiety. Rachel and I grew closer with each passing day. At first, I'd been afraid to let her in, convinced she'd eventually see whatever darkness my family had seen in me. But she never looked at me with anything but kindness and, increasingly, affection. We shared meals several times a week, went to movies, museums, walks in the park. She made me laugh for the first time in years. When I finally kissed her, standing outside her apartment door after dinner one night, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. John Miller, Rachel's father, took me under his wing. A gruff, practical man. He never asked about my past, but seemed to sense there was pain there. He taught me the property management business from the ground up, treating me like the son he'd never had. To the outside world, I was recovering, healing, building a new life from the ashes of the old one. And I was, truly. But underneath it all, beneath the smiles and small triumphs, I carried a weight that never lessened. Every time I saw a father with his child, every time I passed by the university campus, every time I caught a glimpse of a baseball game on TV, I felt the same cold rage, the same sense that something fundamental had been stolen from me. One night, as Rachel slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and acknowledged the truth I'd been avoiding. No matter how good my life became, no matter how much love Rachel gave me, I would never be whole until I confronted what happened. Until I understood why Amy had lied. Until I faced the family that had thrown me away without a second thought. The past wasn't finished with me. Or perhaps I wasn't finished with it. The invitation arrived on a crisp autumn morning, 3 years into my new life. "Dad's turning 60 next weekend," Rachel said, sliding a cream-colored envelope across the breakfast table. "Big celebration at the estate. He specifically asked if you'd come." I tensed immediately. You know I don't do well with crowds. The Miller family gatherings I'd attended so far had been small, intimate affairs. Sunday dinners, a Christmas Eve celebration, a summer barbecue. But a milestone birthday would mean extended family, business associates, friends from every corner of John's life. Dozens of strangers with questions I wasn't prepared to answer. Rachel reached across the table and took my hand. Her eyes held mine with that steady gaze that had saved me on the rooftop years ago. "Come for you, not for them," she said softly. "It's time, Ethan." I knew what she meant. Despite therapy, despite our love, despite the stability I'd built, I still carried my past like a shadow. I avoided social situations where my history might come up. I'd created elaborate fictions about my childhood when necessary. I was living half a life, and Rachel knew it. I nodded, squeezing her hand. "Okay, for you." The Miller estate sprawled across 3 acres of manicured grounds just outside the city. Cars lined the circular driveway as we arrived. Mercedes, BMWs, Jaguars, reminding me painfully of my father's black sedan. The house itself was a colonial masterpiece, all white columns and floor-to-ceiling windows filled with light and laughter as we entered. John greeted me with a firm handshake that turned into a hug. "Glad you made it, son," he said, the term of endearment both warming and wounding me simultaneously. For the first hour, I navigated the party successfully. I stayed close to Rachel, smiled at appropriate moments, kept my responses to questions vague but pleasant. But as the evening wore on and the crowd grew, the questions became more pointed. "What did you study in college?" asked a silver-haired woman who turned out to be Rachel's aunt. "Where did you grow up?" inquired one of John's golf buddies. "What does your father do?" questioned a business associate, champagne glass in hand. Each question felt like a needle under my skin. My collar grew tight, my palms sweaty. The room seemed to shrink around me. I excused myself and stepped onto the terrace, gulping the cool night air. But I wasn't alone for long. An elderly cousin of John's followed me out, drink in hand and curiosity in his eyes. So, young man, he said, leaning against the railing beside me, Rachel tells us very little about your background. Why is it you never mention your family? Something inside me snapped. 3 years of therapy, of rebuilding, of healing, and still, I couldn't escape. Couldn't just be Ethan, the man who loved Rachel. Always dragging the ghost of Ethan Carter behind me. I spun around, aware that the terrace doors were open, that my voice would carry, but beyond caring. Because my family threw me away, I shouted, my voice cracking. They accused me of a crime I didn't commit. They didn't need evidence. They just believed what they wanted to believe. The party fell silent. Through the glass doors, I could see frozen figures, champagne glasses midair. Conversation halted. Rachel stood in the doorway, her face pale but her eyes fierce with protective love. My chest heaved. My vision blurred with unshed tears. I felt cornered, exposed, raw. I moved to push past them all, to run as I'd been running for 7 years, but a strong hand caught my arm. John Miller stood before me, his weathered face serious. I braced myself, certain that now that I'd ruined his party, embarrassed his family, revealed the broken thing at my core, he would finally reject me too. I closed my eyes, waiting for the blow. Instead, I felt his hand grip my shoulder firmly, anchoring me. I believe you, he said, his voice low but clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. 3 simple words. For 7 years, no one had said them to me. Not a single person had looked at me and chosen simply to believe in my innocence. My knees gave way. I sank to the terrace stones, a sob tearing from my throat. John knelt beside me, keeping his hand on my shoulder. Rachel was there in an instant, her arms around me. Then her mother, then others. Not to judge or question, but to support, to lift me back to my feet, to guide me inside, away from curious eyes. That night marked a turning point. The Millers didn't ask for details I wasn't ready to share, but they created a space where my truth could exist, where I wasn't defined by an accusation. 2 years later, Rachel became my wife in a small ceremony in the garden of the Miller estate. 6 months after that, we welcomed our son, James. As I held him for the first time, I made a silent promise. He would always know unconditional love. He would always be believed. I would be the father I had lost. For a while, it seemed like my past was truly behind me. I had a career managing several of John's properties. I had a beautiful wife who knew my darkest moments and loved me anyway. I had a son whose laughter healed parts of me I thought would be broken forever. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon as I was making dinner while James napped, my phone rang. I answered without checking the screen. Hello? Ethan? Sweetheart? It's Mom. My hand froze. Wooden spoon suspended over the pot I'd been stirring. That voice, the voice that had once screamed at me to get out, that had called me a monster, now soft, tentative, almost pleading. Every terrible memory crashed back. I hit the end button without speaking, my heart hammering in my chest. Within seconds, my phone lit up with a text message. Please don't hang up. We need to talk. It's about Amy. I stared at the phone screen, my vision blurring as another message appeared. Please listen, Amy confessed. She lied. We were wrong. A laugh escaped me, harsh, unhinged, bordering on hysterical. 7 years of my life. 7 years of homelessness, addiction, suicidal thoughts. 7 years of being treated like a monster, all because of a lie. My fingers shook as I typed a single reply. Meet me. One last time. 3 days later, Rachel and I sat in a quiet cafe downtown. She'd insisted on coming, her hand firm in mine as we waited. When my parents walked through the door, I barely recognized them. My father's hair had gone completely gray. My mother looked frail, her face lined with years I hadn't witnessed. They rushed toward me, arms outstretched, but Rachel rose and stepped between us. No hugging, she said, her voice calm but firm. Sit down and talk. They sank into the chairs across from us, looking like strangers wearing my parents' faces. My mother reached across the table, but I pulled my hands away. Ethan, she sobbed, mascara already streaking her cheeks. Please forgive us. We made a terrible mistake. Amy admitted everything last month, my father said, his voice hollow. She was jealous of the attention you got. She wanted everyone to focus on her for once. She never imagined it would go so far. I stared at them, feeling nothing but a vast emptiness where rage had lived for so long. "What punishment did Amy receive?" I asked quietly. My mother looked down, fidgeting with her wedding ring. "She's devastated, Ethan. She wants to apologize to you personally. She wants to make amends." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Make amends? How? By giving me back 7 years of my life, my education, my career, my dignity?" My parents flinched with each question. "Good. Let them feel a fraction of what I'd endured." "We looked for you," my father said weakly. "After a year when we started having doubts." "Doubts?" I cut him off. "You beat me. You threw me out like garbage. You cut me off from everything and everyone. And you waited a year to have doubts?" We spoke for almost an hour. They cried. They begged. They offered money, connections, anything to make amends. I felt nothing but a strange, distant pity for these broken people. The following week, I agreed to meet Amy alone. She was waiting when I arrived, nervously shredding a napkin, no longer a child but a young woman of 19 carrying an unbearable weight. I sat across from her without speaking. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she began, voice trembling. "But I needed to talk to you." She told me everything, how she'd been jealous of me, how she'd wanted attention, how a small lie had spiraled out of control until she couldn't take it back, how she'd convinced herself it was true, how she'd finally broken down and confessed last month during therapy. "I destroyed your life," she whispered, tears flowing freely. "I can never fix that. I think about it every day." I listened silently, searching for the fury that had fueled me for years. But I felt only emptiness, like a fire that had finally burned itself out, leaving nothing but ash. "Can you ever forgive me?" she asked finally, her eyes red and swollen. I closed my eyes, considering the question. The truth was, I didn't know. Forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip, a gift I could bestow to ease her conscience. "I don't know," I said honestly, then stood to leave. One final meeting remained. My parents had been calling daily, desperate to reconnect, to rebuild. I agreed to see them one last time, to give them the closure they sought, and perhaps to find my own. We met at the same cafe. They arrived bearing photo albums, legal documents, promises of inheritance restored. They spoke of family holidays, of meeting their grandson, of making up for lost time. I let them talk until they ran out of words. Then I stood, Rachel beside me. "You lost your son 7 years ago," I said quietly. "Keep it that way." Their faces crumpled, but I felt no satisfaction, no vindication. Only release. Taking Rachel's hand, I walked out without looking back. The sunlight hit my face as we stepped onto the sidewalk, warm and bright. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't feel the shadow of my past hovering behind me. I looked up at the clear blue sky, drawing a deep breath that felt somehow different from any breath before it. Lighter. Freer. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if the wounds would ever fully heal. But as we walked toward our car, toward our home, our son, our life, I knew I was finally ready to move forward, and that was enough.